The order was placed before King Charles without ceremony, without witnesses from the wider family, and without any suggestion that the decision could still be reversed. One signature would sever the last formal privileges connecting Prince Harry to the working heart of the monarchy. Charles stared at the final page, lowered his pen, and remained silent. Then he signed. Within minutes, palace officials were informed that the king's younger son had lost every remaining royal right, still protected by the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the first page twice before taking the pen. His private secretary watched him pause at the line, naming Harry as the sovereign's second son. A royal directive is a formal order issued under the monarch's authority, and this one removed palace access, protected accommodation, ceremonial consultation, restricted archive entry, and every future role representing the sovereign. They had been the last bridge between exile and return. Once Charles signed, that bridge was gone. The monarch did not request softer language or remove a single clause. He signed beneath the wording exactly as written, knowing the order would not erase Harry as his son, but would end every institutional right, still resting on royal permission. Family identity remained. Royal trust did not. Harry received the news through a secure call in California. He stood alone, listened without interrupting, and asked whether the decision had come directly from his father. When the answer came, the prince lowered the phone and whispered that Charles had not simply closed a palace door. He had declared that his son no longer belonged. The pain came from knowing that future ceremonies and royal family moments would now depend on invitation rather than belonging. The decision began with a sealed packet recovered during a review of sensitive correspondence. Inside were copied messages, private scheduling requests, and a handwritten note suggesting restricted palace information had been discussed beyond authorized family channels. The packet appeared to show not one mistake, but a pattern. Then another name emerged. Beneath Charles's signature sat a witness certification signed by Prince William. The future king had not issued the order, but his presence proved the succession supported the removal. Before the palace announcement was released, William asked for 5 private minutes with his father. What he said turned procedure into betrayal. And as the king's order began moving through the palace, the deepest wound was no longer hidden in legal language. It was waiting inside the private history of a father, 2 sons, and a family that had run out of chances. Long before the documents appeared, Charles had been balancing 2 identities that could no longer exist peacefully beside each other. He was a father who remembered Harry as a grieving boy, walking behind his mother's coffin. But he was also the king, responsible for protecting an institution larger than any private sorrow. Across from him stood William, carrying his own memories, his own anger, and the growing conviction that love could not keep excusing damage without eventually becoming weakness. Charles opened the desk drawer and removed an old photograph of his sons. He studied Harry's face, then turned it downward when William entered. The prince understood. His father was not reconsidering. He was hiding the pain of enforcing the order. The king resisted permanent separation because he still divided Harry the son from Harry the former working royal. A working royal is a family member who performs official duties for the monarch. Even after public attacks and private disclosures, Charles preserved quiet access. Those permissions were not reconciliation, but they let him believe the relationship had not died. William could no longer share that hope. As heir, he carried responsibility for protected information, royal residences, ceremonial authority, and succession planning, the process that secures who will lead the monarchy next. Every exception made for Harry created uncertainty for Catherine, their children, palace staff, and the future crown. The future king told Charles he never wanted his brother erased. He wanted boundaries that would survive the next argument. William's voice remained controlled until he admitted that every private concession seemed to return in another public conflict. The recovered documents did not show one careless mistake. To him, they showed trust being tested after warnings had already been given. Meghan was not named in the directive, yet a communication described a proposed media project built around palace customs, private rooms, and family protocols. Harry insisted during a recorded consultation that the project was never approved. Its existence alarmed Charles and William, because private access could become public material. Camilla then spoke to Charles alone. The Queen Consort warned that partial punishment would satisfy no one and protect nothing. Leaving one ceremonial privilege intact could reopen the conflict during a coronation, funeral, state ceremony, or national crisis. She told him, indecision was now its own danger. William finally named the moment his confidence collapsed. A private gathering at Windsor, where Harry gave his word, witnesses heard it, and the new documents later contradicted it. To understand why Charles finally chose the crown over the final thread connecting him to Harry, the story must return to the night when one quiet promise inside Windsor became the point of no return. The crisis did not truly begin with the newly discovered papers. It began months earlier, inside a private room at Windsor, where 4 members of the royal family sat without advisors, recording devices, or press officers. The meeting had one purpose: to prevent another public rupture. Charles offered Harry a limited path back into private family life. William offered something even harder, his guarded trust. And Harry gave them both a direct promise that no detail from that room would ever be used beyond its walls. Charles arranged the gathering after months of strained calls. Windsor was not simply another royal residence, it was one of the monarchy's most private homes, a place used for family meetings and official duty. No aides entered. Camilla sat beside the king, while William remained guarded, and Harry arrived determined to stay composed. The discussion never concerned restoring Harry as a working royal. Charles focused on secure visits, family occasions, emergency access, and limited use of royal facilities during trips to Britain. He made clear that these permissions would continue only under 3 conditions: no advance publicity, no commercial reference to the arrangement, and no disclosure involving the monarch, the heir, or palace security. Harry listened, then described the meeting as a chance to stop punishing one another. Yet resentment sharpened beneath his words. He felt like an outsider requesting permission to enter the home where he had grown up, and that humiliation followed him even as relief settled in. William initially refused every special accommodation. The prince changed only when Harry spoke about wanting his children to understand their British family. He did not want the next generation inheriting a conflict they never created. Still, the future king warned that one breach would destroy the entire arrangement. Charles then placed a handwritten summary on the table. Harry read it, pushed the page back and said, "You have my word. Nothing from this room leaves this room." The king held his gaze. William watched him before finally nodding, while Camilla remained silent but visibly unconvinced. The recovered packet later exposed an early outline for a filmed return to Britain. Proposed sequences mirrored the Windsor discussion, security negotiations, family access, and the emotional meaning of returning to royal property. More damaging was a message describing those private conditions as the emotional spine of a future public account. William read that line twice. Then he looked at Harry and asked him to face the promise he had made. The documents had transformed a private suspicion into written evidence. But before Charles could make his final decision, William demanded one last confrontation with the brother whose promise had brought them to the edge. William did not raise his voice when Harry entered the room. That made the confrontation more frightening. The prince stood beside a narrow table where copies of the recovered documents had been arranged in chronological order. Charles remained near the fireplace, visibly exhausted, while Harry looked from his father to his brother and realized the meeting was not intended to negotiate. William touched one page with his finger and delivered the sentence that shattered the silence. "Look at me and tell me you didn't know." Harry held his brother's stare, but his answer came slowly. He admitted that exploratory discussions had taken place around a possible documentary and written account. Yet he insisted he had never authorized private palace details to be used. A documentary proposal is an early plan describing what a project may include, not proof that every idea has been approved. To him, unfinished language could not be treated as a completed betrayal. William rejected that defense. He did not ask whether cameras had rolled or whether a manuscript had been published. He asked why anything from Windsor had entered the proposal at all. When Harry said he had spoken emotionally after leaving, the future king pulled back a chair but remained standing. His anger was too controlled to be mistaken for calm. Charles finally stepped forward. The king asked why his son had offered a promise if resentment had already made it impossible to keep. Harry answered that he wanted his father to trust him, but he also wanted someone outside the palace to understand how degrading the conditions had felt. The monarch's face hardened. He said trust could not survive when every private kindness was later reshaped into proof of cruelty. William then lifted a scanned, handwritten note. The page carried a phrase Harry had used inside Windsor. "A guest in the house where I learned to grieve." The prince recognized it instantly. He said nothing, and that silence revealed more than any recorded interview could have done. The words had come from him, even if the final project had not. Charles placed another document beside it. The confidential warning had been sent after an earlier leak and acknowledged in writing by Harry. A confidential warning is a private formal notice explaining the consequences of another breach. It stated clearly that any further disclosure involving royal arrangements would lead to permanent removal of his remaining privileges. The king rested his hand over the papers and told Harry the decision was no longer only his. Legal advisors, security officials, and William had already been drawn into the process. The family argument had become an act of crown authority. Harry had entered the room expecting to defend his intentions, but he left knowing that intention no longer mattered. Because behind the family confrontation, the full power of the crown was already moving against him. The king's signature carried enormous weight, but Charles did not act alone. Behind the final order stood a carefully aligned group whose agreement made reversal almost impossible. William, the monarch's senior private advisors, the keeper of restricted royal records, and the officials responsible for crown security. Yet the most decisive conversation did not happen around a council table. It happened when Catherine found William alone, holding the page that contained Harry's words, and asked whether he was protecting the monarchy or punishing his brother. Catherine stepped closer, but William did not look up. Anger still held him rigid, yet she could see the grief beneath it. She asked whether he would regret supporting a decision that might permanently separate their children from Harry's family. The prince admitted that he feared both outcomes, another betrayal, and a silence that could last for generations. William finally answered with honesty. He could forgive insults aimed at him, but he could not gamble with Catherine's privacy, their children's safety, or the stability of the succession. Succession means the planned order in which the crown passes from one monarch to the next. Harry had treated access as proof of love. The institution had to treat access as responsibility. Charles's advisors warned that partial punishment would create gaps. Harry could still seek exceptional entry, ceremonial inclusion, private briefings during family emergencies, or a future representative role. Those privileges were not automatic hereditary rights. They depended on royal permission, security approval, household rules, and the sovereign's discretion. The king could remove them, while William's support meant they would not return in the next reign. Anne then reviewed the final wording. The princess refused any line that appeared to erase Harry as Charles's son, but she supported removing every role, permission, and expectation tied to royal service. Her intervention mattered, because it made the order severe without making it cruel. Family identity would remain. Institutional authority would not. A confidential succession clause made the decision even harder to reverse. The clause required any future sovereign to order a complete formal review before restoring Harry's position. A formal review is a documented examination by security and household officials, not a private promise between relatives. Even William, once king, could not simply undo the order after an emotional reconciliation. Then the machinery moved. Harry's security liaison received instructions, and one message was sent before the palace announcement. It concerned the royal residence he still believed would remain available. The decision had been transformed from a father's punishment into a lasting act of royal policy, and Harry was about to discover its meaning, not through a speech, but through a door that would no longer open. The first sign that Harry's old life had ended arrived without royal language or emotional explanation. A security message informed him that every previous access credential linked to crown property had been cancelled. No residence would be held for him. No restricted palace office could receive him without advance authorization. No ceremonial planning document would include him automatically. Harry read the message twice, called the number beneath it, and discovered that the decision had already taken effect before the world even knew it existed. Harry listened as the security officer confirmed what the message meant. His former entry permissions had been removed from the royal system. Crown property means buildings and residences controlled for the monarch's official use, rather than owned as an ordinary private home. Future visits would now require advance coordination, with no guaranteed accommodation, private office, household staff, official transport, or entry into sensitive areas. The exclusion reached further. Harry's name disappeared from contingency plans covering state events, royal funerals, investitures, coronation duties, and emergency representation. An investiture is a formal ceremony where honors are presented on behalf of the sovereign. He might still attend certain family occasions if invited, but he would arrive as a relative, not as a man carrying royal authority. Harry called Charles directly. The king answered, yet he refused to reverse the instruction. His son asked whether he would now need permission to enter the places where he had grown up. Charles replied that childhood memory did not create permanent authority over crown property. The words were measured. Their effect was brutal. Meghan watched Harry lower the phone and sit without speaking. She urged him to challenge the order publicly, then stopped when she saw his anger collapse into grief. He told her he had expected punishment. He had not expected his father to make separation feel permanent. She stayed beside him as the silence deepened. Then, a palace courier delivered a private box. Inside rested personal belongings left in secure storage, including an old military photograph and a handwritten birthday card from Charles. No note explained the return. Harry understood the message anyway. The palace was clearing the last traces of his presence. Harry later read a prepared public defense, accusing the institution of using unfinished documents without context. He refused to approve the final paragraph because it attacked William directly. For the first time, he chose hesitation over retaliation. Late that evening, Harry contacted his brother privately and asked for one conversation without lawyers, aides, or public statements. The palace had taken away Harry's access, his role, and his final institutional protections. But in the silence that followed, he reached for the one relationship no royal order could formally cancel. There were no private secretaries on the call, no lawyers listening, and no prepared statements resting beside either brother. William answered after midnight. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Harry finally said he was not calling to demand the order be withdrawn. He wanted to know whether anything remained between them once the monarchy had removed everything else. William closed his eyes before answering. His response was not warm, but it was honest. "You are still my brother. That is exactly why this has hurt so much." Harry asked that the conversation remain entirely personal. William agreed, but he made one boundary clear. The royal directive would not be reversed during this call. A directive is a formal order issued under the monarch's authority, and separating it from their private relationship allowed them to speak as brothers rather than as the heir and a former working royal. Harry then admitted what he had resisted saying aloud. He had used details from the Windsor meeting while explaining his pain to people developing future projects. He insisted he never intended their words to appear exactly as spoken, but he accepted that this defense sounded empty after the promise he had made. The breach was not only about publication, it was about taking something private beyond the room. William answered without anger. The documents had not created the family collapse, he said. They had proved it already existed. Every confidential conversation now carried the threat of future exposure. The prince could either speak honestly to his brother or protect Catherine and their children, but he could no longer trust himself to do both. Harry stopped fighting. He confessed that anger had become the only way he knew how to remain connected. Each accusation forced the palace to answer, and every answer proved that his family still saw him. The pattern had kept him visible, but it had also turned pain into a weapon. For once, William heard remorse, without an excuse following behind it. William refused to restore royal privileges, yet he offered one private channel for genuine family emergencies. The number would bypass palace offices. but it could never be used for negotiations, publicity, or institutional requests. It was not reconciliation. It was one human line left open. Harry accepted the boundary. While his brother remained silent, he deleted the prepared statement attacking William and abandoned plans for a public campaign. The brothers ended the call without forgiveness and without victory, yet the conflict had changed. Just as the palace gates opened to a public storm, neither Charles nor Harry could control. By sunrise, the private order had become a national spectacle. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming. Commentators argued over whether Charles had protected the monarchy or abandoned his son. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath a cold morning sky as phones displayed the same breaking headline. Then a woman stepped forward and placed 2 photographs beside the palace railings. One of Harry as a child with Charles, and another of him walking away from royal duty decades later. Buckingham Palace confirmed that the sovereign had withdrawn every remaining discretionary privilege linked to Harry's former royal position. A discretionary privilege is permission granted by the monarch rather than a right guaranteed by birth. The statement insisted that the decision concerned institutional responsibility, not the private bond between father and son. That distinction mattered because the crown wanted finality without declaring the family itself dead, and because future ceremonies could no longer be clouded by uncertainty over Harry's place. It settled protocol, but deepened the human wound. The media turned that careful language into open warfare. One major evening broadcaster began, "The spare is no longer waiting in the wings. The crown has removed the wings entirely." The phrase spread within minutes because it framed Harry's removal as the final institutional chapter of his departure, not another temporary punishment. A London newspaper then published the image that defined the day. Charles appeared in formal dress on one side, while Harry stood alone at an earlier royal event on the other. Between them sat a closed palace gate beneath the headline, "The Last Door Shut." Copies vanished from newsstands as the picture became a symbol of separation. Supporters gathered near Windsor and called the punishment excessive. One man told reporters during a live interview that unfinished project documents were not the same as a public betrayal. He argued that removing every right left Harry no path back, turning family estrangement into state policy. Others defended Charles with equal force. A former palace employee said in a televised interview that royal access could not survive without confidentiality. Her words shifted the argument from whether Harry remained loved to whether he could still be trusted. Charles refused requests to release the most damaging pages or Harry's private admission. The king would defend the order, but he would not publicly destroy his son to justify it. As the crowds thinned, the monarch watched the coverage in silence and asked for the old photograph he had turned face down. The world saw a king closing a palace gate, but the true verdict would be delivered away from the cameras when Charles confronted what remained after power had done everything love could not. When the palace finally became quiet, Charles returned to the same desk where he had signed the order. The documents were gone, removed for secure storage, but the mark they had left could not be filed away. In front of him rested the photograph of William and Harry as boys. The king turned it upright, looked at both faces, and allowed himself the grief he had concealed from every advisor. He had protected the crown. He had also accepted that protection sometimes demanded a wound no authority could heal. Charles watched the entry being completed. The directive became part of the crown's household protocols, the internal rules controlling royal access, ceremony, security, and residence. Harry's privileges disappeared from active records, palace systems, ceremonial plans, and accommodation arrangements. No appeal followed. No public campaign began. It had become permanent policy. William privately confirmed that he would respect his father's decision and supported the line between family membership and royal authority, while Catherine ensured no one around the heir treated the outcome as victory. Celebration would turn discipline into cruelty. Charles dictated a letter to Harry, stopped halfway, and rewrote it by hand. The king stated that the decision was his, and that William must not carry the blame alone. He did not apologize for protecting the monarchy, yet he admitted the signature had caused deep sorrow. Authority had succeeded. His heart had not. Harry read the letter alone. He did not tear it up, release it, or answer through the press. Instead, the prince placed it beside the military photograph returned from palace storage. His silence became acceptance. He had lost royal privilege, but he refused to turn the final loss into another weapon. William kept the private number promised during their midnight conversation. Neither brother called it reconciliation. It proved the bond beneath the titles still survived. Charles's order established a final truth. Birth could not guarantee access, influence, or authority forever. The monarchy had chosen accountability over emotional exception. Harry was no longer suspended between duty and exile. His formal life inside the working crown was finished. The king remained his father, William remained his brother, but the palace was no longer his institution. This was not revenge. It was the permanent separation of family love from royal trust. The palace doors remained closed, the order remained intact, and the monarchy moved forward. But behind the crown's strengthened walls stood a father and son, forced to live with the permanent price of everything they could no longer trust each other to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.